Does Donald Trump have a coherent policy in the Middle East? Is there a real scandal with his connection with the Russians? And is the survival of the human species in jeopardy? I sat down with Professor Noam Chomsky for this wide-ranging conversation, but here in part one, we're going to focus on events in Syria. Professor Chomsky, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Let's start with Trump's strikes on Syria, the most recent ones on the airbase following the chemical attack, which was widely blamed on the Syrian government. A lot of people see the strikes as political theater for domestic US consumption, where Trump is trying to distract from his low ratings, from his policies that he could not push. And it was seen as a way to unite both Republicans and Democrats behind him and kind of like build this image of a tough president. But others see this as a signal of a drastic shift in US foreign policy and really Trump's entire worldview, it seems. And I'm just curious, how do you read it?
Well, there's no indication of any policy decision behind it. It looks like a single act, which is understood on all sides to have been nothing more than a signal. So they hit a basically empty airbase. A day later, planes were flying from it. It had no military significance. So it's very plausible to believe that this is Trump's way of saying, look, I'm tougher than Obama. We sort of forget the fact that Trump strongly supported Obama's position of not striking back at the time of the chemical weapons, but that's history now. He can say, look how tough I am, Obama's responsible for everything that happened. And I presume it's something like that, but you really can't tell. The administration spokespersons are all over the place. Nikki Haley at the UN is very aggressive. Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, is waffling, says essentially nothing. Trump himself probably barely knows what's going on. We have, whether there's any meaningful plan behind this looks pretty dubious.
But would it be plausible that he actually was moved as he claimed he was, that by seeing the images of children, that this is what actually made him take action?
Yeah, it's possible, but then why? One has to ask other questions, like why isn't he moved by the fact that Saudi Arabia, which we strongly support with our aid, is imposing starvation and massacre on tens of thousands of people in Yemen? Why not be moved by that? Plenty of things to be moved by. But there's also questions, at least that could be asked, about just what happened. There are some pretty credible voices that are skeptical about the charge that Syria was involved. Lawrence Wilkerson's one. People are not easily dismissed. So at the very least, there should have been an inquiry into what happened.
Zooming out a little bit and looking at the big picture in Syria, there was a time when this was a popular uprising 6 years ago, and it was very easy to just say the correct outcome is the democratization of Syria. But at this stage, 6 years later, it looks like a proxy war of the worst order, very unsavory characters there competing, and the forces who are really pushing for a free democratic Syria don't seem to have a particularly powerful position right now in the country. Given that we're in the mess we're in today, what do you think is the most realistic desired outcome at this stage, and what should the US role be?
I mean, if you take a look at what's happening, there's very little doubt that the substantial mass of the atrocities are the responsibility of the Assad regime, and the Russians back them. But the main priority now should be to find ways to just lessen the violence. I mean, it is tearing the country to shreds. The country is descending to suicide. So any acts that can be taken to lessen the level of violence, let local ceasefires, moves toward some kind of potential diplomatic settlement, those are high priorities, along with something much simpler: aid to the people who need it. There's plenty of people who can be reached, who are in need and are not being helped.
Yeah, although there seems to be some humanitarian fatigue. Basically, this problem has gone on for so long without a prospect of a political solution. A lot of people credit that with the fact that people are getting more numb to the suffering of Syrians because this has gone on for so long.
They're not getting numb. They've always been numb. the funding for humanitarian aid has been very low. Notice that we're supposed to believe that Trump was horrified by the sight of a couple of dozen babies apparently killed by chemical warfare. This is the same person who's blocking any entry of any Syrians to the United States. So just by accident, at the same time that the chemical warfare, alleged chemical attack took place, I happened to get an email letter from somebody who was coming here to interview me. He's born, won't mention his name, he's born in Germany, lives in England. He happens to be originally Syrian. He's involved with the anti-Assad Syrian Writers Union. He couldn't come because he was blocked by U.S. security officers at Heathrow Airport. That happened to be the same time. What about these people who are fleeing? I mean, what's called the refugee crisis is really a severe moral crisis in the West, the United States particularly, but Europe as well. So if you're moved by the sight of Syrian children being killed, then help them. Can be done. Okay. That's quite apart from the effort to try to move towards some kind of reduction of violence and opening to a political settlement, which is not going to be attractive. There's no attractive outcome now. You're quite right that at the beginning it was a popular uprising which merited strong support, but what's left of it is pretty hard to see in the current situation.
I want to move over to Palestine, this dichotomy between one state and two states.
But those are not the options. There's another option, the one that is in fact being pursued.